probably makes a little bit of sense to just get started and, sort of figure out, brainstorm, what we can do. I know one of the things I tried to do before this, I actually, we have professional associations like the American Political Science Association for me, and I was like, I wonder if they've got anything on 250, coming up. And nothing was there like on the website. And so I'm not sure if different associations, which are normally affiliated with faculty on campuses, may in fact be thinking about something. So that may be one thought. I know there are various historical society organizations for academics that they're part of. For me, there are various sort of professional associations. And so that might be, a place where they may be thinking about some sort of things to do on college campuses around this. So that was one thing that came to mind for me.
Is American Historical Association in any way affiliated with college professors, or is it more just historians?
Well, the American Historical Association is actually, that's an international, it's sort of an international organization. It covers like all of history. You know what I mean? So it's not focused on American history. It's the Organization of American Historians that's more focused on US history.
Yeah.
And also that I believe that they're the ones that publish the History Teacher.
That's correct. Yeah.
So that they're probably more linked in with, curriculum and stuff like that as far as, the teaching of American history goes.
Yeah.
It's not that the American Historical Association wouldn't be, many college professors do belong to it.
Yep.
But, and it may be planning 250th stuff. I don't really know. I'm no longer a member of either of these. Because they're expensive and I'm retired. But yeah, but I would say the OAH is the organization that you should look at.
Yeah. I tap my development money for my memberships. They are pricey now.
Yeah. They're getting really expensive.
They're beyond getting. They have gotten there.
Yeah.
Especially if you do a number of them. And we've got the American Political Science Association. I'm a member of the Midwest Political Science Association. I'm a member of, and also National Conference of Black Political Scientists. So that adds up between just those three, and those aren't all that you can be a part of. But again, I imagine at some point, because obviously teaching about, the American Revolution, and for a lot of us who do American national government, which I'll be doing in the fall, I mean, those are obviously topics that come up in teaching, and we talk about, the American Revolution and the Constitution, and certainly historians do that. And so at least from the standpoint of curriculum stuff, might be sort of places where that kind of stuff is at. Yeah.
Yeah. I am a member of the National Council for Public History. Sorry, it was somebody else. Okay. And of course, the Public History Association is what a lot of people at CCSU belong to, and of course what a lot of public historians in Connecticut would belong to as a national organization.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me, that, and I think I voiced this the last time around, while I thought a lot of the resources that we are compiling can be very useful to people. I know for me, when I'm doing, I primarily focus more on national sort of politics, but being a part of this has made me think about how I could do a better job of doing some linkages to Connecticut, especially Connecticut's role in, in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, certainly Connecticut Compromise. I mean, there are certain sort of pivotal things that as a sort of a political science professor who focuses on American politics, having a much better sense than I do right now of what Connecticut's connection is in terms of historical sites, in terms of historical documents, even when you go, forward in terms of, we've talked before, things like the Underground Railroad and, what's that story of American democracy that Connecticut is a part of, right? In terms of, to me, just as a faculty member, I just don't know all of that, to be honest. I'm not from Connecticut, so, I'm at a disadvantage on that. But this has made me sort of think about, hey there, Sandy, made me think more about how I can sort of tap into those things. Are there places where there are original papers, perhaps? I mean, these could be assignments for students to do, and so, and again, there are universities all across the state where some of this stuff is housed, and other places where people have to make field trips to. But I think, that kind of information is sort of packaged in a way for faculty, especially for me as a political scientist, would be interesting to take a look at and be able to utilize in my teaching, in that sense.
I think this is part of the problem, that just listing resources does not help you use them. I'm a 17th and 18th century historian, primarily of New England. And I know a lot of the resources but what I hear from high school teachers and primarily from high school teachers is, if they don't have a curriculum, if there's no preparation that shows them how to use these things, it's not, just knowing that they exist doesn't really help very much. College professors are a different ballgame, because if it's not your field, like you said, you don't really know what the situation is if it's not your primary research field, or if you're not teaching a class. And for adjunct professors that teach many of the surveys that deal with the Revolution and the Declaration, those, I was chair of a department, a pretty large department. We had, at one point when I was department chair, more than 20 adjuncts, and most of the adjuncts were not only overwhelmed with work, but I think because they were contingent faculty, they were afraid to deviate from the timeline. And so anytime you tried to get them to do something creative, like use reacting to the past, or, and break from that, Plato to NATO narrative, it was just hard to get them to do it. They were afraid they'd be fired for not getting enough coverage. And Steve knows, he was he was an adjunct in the department. He may have a different impression, but
I agree. Is the way that this is going to get done at the college level, do you think it's going to be in classrooms, correct? Is it going to be individual people doing this? I
would like to see, I feel like we've been, if I may be frank, feel like we've been spinning our wheels a little bit, not coming up with things to do. And I think it would be great to perhaps have a speakers panel that could visit the different colleges around the state, advertise itself, or something. We have experts in the state. The OAH, for example, Organization of American Historians, they have a speakers bureau. And back in the day, it used to not be too expensive, where they would basically give a discounted rate to any college who wanted to have that speaker come. I think maybe a good thing to do would be to see if we could sign up people on a speakers bureau to visit either college classrooms or do presentations that have been vetted, as good content.
So who would be doing the vetting? I think that's one of the questions that we've had a bit.
What about this committee? I mean, I don't know. I think that I feel like we're spinning our wheels a little bit. I mean, does anybody else feel that? Because if I'm the only one, then I'll be quiet.
I mean, I think that, we have a couple concrete tasks for K-12. But I agree with you, Kathy, that how to do this systematically, I don't know that. And maybe Bilal or Sandy or anybody here does. I mean, the way I would see it happening would be somebody in that's teaching, say, an adjunct that's teaching the first half of a survey, America to the Civil War, could be convinced to do it. I don't know how you would convince somebody that's teaching the Reconstruction to the present. How are you going to teach that? How are you going to convince them to put it in a curriculum context?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the problems with, a lot of things since the pandemic has been colleges like Central, they don't have that many speakers coming in anymore. What about just having an evening program dedicated to the revolution, and you get 3 speakers talking about the Declaration, or you have one person doing a presentation on something that relates to Connecticut and the revolution? I mean, and again, I'm not trying to blow my own horn here. I worked with Chris Radio and the National Park Service on people of color at the Reading encampment. Almost nobody in Connecticut even knows about the Reading encampment, but it was the winter encampment that followed Valley Forge, right, in 1778-79. And it's a project that's already done. It could be something that would be great to talk about to college groups, and you would just put it together and sell it. I'm sure there's a lot of things like this, like Nina Dayton at UConn just did a book on Phyllis Wheatley, who wrote poems to George Washington. I'm sure that Nina could be persuaded to put a program together that could be offered to college campuses, for a small fee. And then people teaching classes will be encouraged to have their students attend for extra credit. But you could also get in the people who just love history, just the history majors. Doesn't have to be, just people teaching surveys. That's just one idea.
And so I will say, I feel like we have to be careful in what we decide to do, because I think we really are only going to be able to do maybe 1 or 2 things, especially if they are a little more hands-on. And so I pose the question, do we feel that's the best way to engage college students? Is there something else that would get them excited? I don't know very well anymore.
I see 2 potential directions on the speakers, and I raised this the last time, and I know, Cindy, you had raised some questions about the vetting and how we sort of do that. One is, I think there's the idea of helping to connect faculty with communities around the state, which I think, again, I understand the sort of hesitancy around, because you don't know where people are coming from and what they're going to say, what they're going to do. I mean, I get that part, and that worry and not wanting ownership of that. But I think, obviously communities do their own sort of vetting. If there are historians and they want to invite that person to the community, and if they want to pay an honorarium or not pay an honorarium, I don't think that really needs to be this committee's concern, as much as it's saying there are scholars around the state that if local historical societies or public schools would like to have someone come in. I mean, I got an invitation just the other day to speak at a magnet school about work on democracy sort of stuff. And I've done that on a number of occasions in different schools. And I think there are academics in the state who can do that kind of work. We don't have to own them because, again, communities are going to reach out. They're going to do their vetting. They're going to ask, they're going to say, here's what we'd like you to talk about. But if there are people like the one at, UConn who has just done something on Phyllis Wheaton, I mean, I think that would be a great conversation at a library or at a, or a college campus. So I think that's one direction. The speaker thing, I think, given the budget limits that we have, we just don't have the money for that. Would be interesting though if there were a host university where there were some event or two or more during this period of celebration that would host that kind of a discussion and turn out students and community people. I mean, and again, that still is trying to figure out who those people are. But again, that is one potential opportunity. Inviting people. While I do far too much for free, I don't expect everybody else to do it for free. So, I mean, I think that side of this in terms of speakers and speaking fees and other things, again, I just think people should be paid for their intellectual work, and we don't have the resources to pay them to make that happen. The institutions that invite them may be able to do that. That's a different question, but at least what I'm getting from you guys, Cindy and Rachel, about money, we don't have money like that to really sort of finance that in that sense. So, but I think, again, having people in the state who can speak on other college campuses, I think is just a great idea. The resources for me, and I understand completely the idea about curriculum stuff at the K through 12 level, but really all I'm saying at the collegiate level is whether this goes to history, political science, or whatever other relevant sort of department, about here resources to share with your faculty around America 250. This is what we have around the state. Encourage them to ask faculty to integrate some of this into the, I mean, I think that's about as far as we can go because I teach American government different from the next person in my department who's teaching it, different from the next person at Central who's teaching it. I mean, we all do our own thing. And so unlike the K through 12, where it's more of a set kind of curriculum and set of expectations about how things are taught, that just doesn't exist at the college level. But I think putting those resources in front of us, that's about as best we can do. You're not going to create a curriculum that all college professors, adjuncts, whoever are going to use. I mean, I just don't think that's realistic. But I think certainly putting materials in front of them and exposing them to those things that are a part of the state story, I think could be a good thing.
If you don't, forgive me, but if you don't have something in a package, something concrete people can latch onto, how are they even going to know about it? Yeah, I mean, I get speaking invitations all the time, but if you want people to engage with the 250th, you have to offer them something specific to the 250th. And what I was actually proposing was that we organize some speakers. We see if there are people willing to be on a speakers bureau who can set a program. We don't make anybody get it. If they don't want to, we don't make anybody join it. They don't want to join. But then we're able to put on the website that a college, a history department could, or a university could book this program for a fee, and we make the fee low, right? I mean, a standard fee. I usually get, $150 for a presentation at a historical society. Nina Dayton probably gets more, but I think you could get people to agree. Well, I'm willing to do, 3 presentations at $200, a pop, if these are booked by colleges in the state. Now, I don't know. I mean, with state employees, it's also tricky if it's one public institution. requesting something from another public institution, but this stuff can get worked out. It's just, if you don't have actual offerings, what are people supposed to, they're just noodling around. That's my fear. Whereas if you have a program, and I'm not trying to commit Nina Dayton to anything, I'm just saying, but if you had a program that said, Nina Dayton can talk about the Revolutionary War era poetry of Phyllis Wheatley, right? Then people could decide whether to book that program or not book that program. Nobody's forced to do it, but it is a program they've got a choice to book. Connecticut Humanities doesn't have to pay anything because the college would be paying it. That's just one idea that I have.
Andy, haven't really been a part of these conversations, so just listening to catch up a bit. I guess I agree that there has to be some concrete offerings. Sorry if I'm jumping in like midstream too. I don't know what has been. Nina's on my campus and she's given a few talks, and I think at least at UConn, there's a pretty healthy amount of speakers that come in and out still. Whether or not they're attended is a really different question. And so I think, what appeals to when I think about my own students, I also think the appeal has to be way beyond history. I don't know if that's the focus, but the 250th or whatever this is supposed to represent is, to me, relevant to every single department, institute, and center at the University of Connecticut. And there's kids that are interested in things across the board, from, robotics and arts to, I don't know. To me, it's all relevant, assuming you're a citizen or even not a citizen, a citizen of any of the multiple kind of nations, even here in the state. I guess I'm thinking about, the things that really resonate for them. I don't know if it's because they're the COVID generation, but they're quite used to stuff online. So I think if that was going to be a use of resources, speakers, it'd be like she could record something and the communities could film her, and then anybody could, I don't know, something else could be, or they're really like, podcast stuff they can listen to when they're on the go. And certainly apps. I'm assuming there's going to be a 250th app, but it'd be nice to have maybe a student Connecticut 250th app that can even crowdsource and add their own kind of flavor to. They're pretty inventive generation. I think they spend a lot of time alone. Maybe that's, I don't know, but they're an interesting group. And then just me, but something common, something shared, I think is also important, as much as there might be some decentralization. I do think so. I don't know if Connecticut book, whatever, if everybody's going to read, if there's going to be like something. I do think something common is important. I guess the two things that really I think about, at least might be UConn specific, but I think on most campuses, whether I was at two different campuses here, so I was at Connecticut College for a number of years and now at UConn, there's various centers and institutes that have fellows. So like at some point, so I'll just pick the community since I know Nina was a fellow there last year and I was a fellow there 2 years ago. There's a Humanities Institute at UConn. Every year prior, they'll put a call for proposals or call for applications out for the next group of fellows. And you certainly couldn't force anybody, but there's a Center for the Environment. There's a million of these on every campus, right? If one center on every campus maximally, it'd be great if everybody would be willing to craft a CFP that attracted scholars to work that year, specifically thinking critically about the 250th. Then you would have lots of scholars on every campus tasked to think specifically and offer. Part of being a fellow is you often give a talk. Again, whether or not anybody goes is a different question. But that might be one way to kind of decentralize, but also maybe ensure that you're at least getting some activity on every campus.
I think that's a great idea for the campuses that are like the R1s.
Connecticut
for
College has 5 centers at it, so there's centers there also.
the state universities don't have these
Sorry?
I don't think the state universities have these kind of centers,
Uh,
funded centers.
Central, they might have programs. I was done stuff at Central and Southern. I mean, I don't know. You'd have to like map it out. They might not have fellows, but they probably have programming. Even student, what do you call it? Student government and
Yeah, student government, they have some money.
and then also student, like every year, there's lots of programming and you just.
I'm not
somebody-
using your idea. I like your idea. I'm
Yeah.
just saying it's a great idea for those universities that have those kind of centers.
Mhm.
It's not my experience at Central for 25 years. We don't have that. We have a history department that will, work with the political science department and the women's gender and sexuality studies department to bring a speaker. They cobble together little bits of money to do that. They don't have fellows. So what I'm saying is we might need 2 prongs
Mhm.
to reach the different constituencies, the community colleges and things like that. Different things for different folks, but I like your idea of, those that have the centers that can have fellows. That's fabulous.
Yeah, you don't even have to have fellows. I'm just thinking more. So there's the Center for Humanities that you kind of has fellows, and then there's like the Center for, well, now we're departmentalizing, but there's El Instituto, which doesn't have fellows, but they do programming. So, for example, at Central, there's the Center for Africana Studies, Center for Latin American, Latino, Caribbean Center, the LGBTQ Center. They'll all do programming. So it's just a commitment among people to say, for this year, can you do one event or can you have a theme? Or can an entire campus adopt a theme called 250th and you do with it what you will? Anyway, that's one way. And then the other is really, when I think about the students I teach, particularly Native studies, the maybe elephant in the room, or not so much, I don't know what to call it, but like the on-ramp to this, particularly in this moment of our nation and world, I think, bit of a struggle. Bit of a struggle since, especially here in Connecticut, this is where the original site of genocide, the Mystic Massacre, and, what are we actually commemorating in this moment? So, I guess I always thought, and I don't know, this is not necessarily for this, like what's going to happen at educational institutions, but I do wonder if, like, is there going to be something before a parade, if the parade is a kickoff? Like, it just seems like something around national healing or national recognition or not, or state, I mean, for sure national, but also at the state level. Is there going to be something, I think for me personally, at least the students that I see, which might be very particular students, I think a prior recognition ceremony, I don't know what you would call it, something leading up to before the celebrating would be important for them to kind of feel like it's something they could actually participate in. And maybe that's something universities and educational sites could do, but I think it needs to be, I know it's the first question they'll ask. Particularly Black and Indigenous students, but.
I have no answers, but good questions.
It's, and I've had the overall question, and Cindy, you've heard me express it in several occasions, of what is the overall mood in this era, as you said, what is the overall mood toward commemorating 1776? I mean, I'll say it's a bit more varied than it would have been 15 years ago or back in 1976 or something. But that's an obvious point.
I think the general public is interested in commemoration. And commemoration, I mean, there are things to celebrate, right? It is the birth of the country as a nation. But in commemorating, there are also a lot of stories that haven't been told or that a lot of people are unaware of. You know, Dave Namick has done studies on Native people who served in the American Revolution, for example. There are a lot of people that don't realize the really significant Pequot and Mohegan participation in the revolution, in the Revolutionary War. They had per capita the highest number or the highest percentage of enlistees. And I think, like I said, the people of color at the Reading encampment, there are hundreds of people of color at the Reading encampment. The Reading encampment itself is not well known. These are subjects that have not been covered well in the general history that I think people would like to know. Connecticut Explored plans to have a special issue for the summer of 2026, but we'll be running articles on the Revolution and other aspects of that period, you know, throughout. I think people are very interested in it. And I think people want the truth. So give them the truth.
You know, I hadn't thought about this until it was mentioned. I've been in a 4-year institution frame of mind rather than like our community colleges as well. So how has that been thought about, Cindy or Rachel? Not at all. Okay. All right.
It's been thought about in
Yeah.
terms of, we know that that is an important audience. I don't think, we did invite a couple of folks from community colleges to participate in this conversation, but they weren't able to join us. So it might be a one-on-one follow-up with some of those. I'm sorry, we have
There's
a
a fly.
fly. So we will have some follow-up with those folks. And I will say the other two groups of people that we've been thinking a lot about, but again, have no real solution for, in terms of education, thinking about GED students, thinking about English language learners, and then tangentially related, only because it's in that category of adult education, folks who are going in for their citizenship exam. I think those are 3 categories of people that would be interested in the 250th, but we really have not even started to figure out how to reach them. Because it is less centralized than K-12 education, and even less centralized, I think, than college systems.
Yeah. I think wherever we land with, you know, whatever ideas come out of this, I think the communication part is going to be crucial in terms of how this is communicated to various institutions, because everything you've described has a different sort of institutional structure, organization, and, you know, Lee, I mean, it's not the same as a 4-year institution in terms of community colleges, which is not the same as, and then also even, I think being sensitive to language minorities also, I think, is just sort of crucial in how we sort of figure this out, because not all of these conversations should be in English, and not everything that's produced should be in English. And so, yeah, that's something that needs to be figured out as well.
Yeah.
This is one of the interesting things, I think, that, you know, a lot of the veterans in the war came from the Caribbean or were Spanish speaking. A lot of people don't know about this, but of course, Connecticut had a large importation of people known as Spanish Indians. And some of these served in the war. Again, I think like looking at veterans, I just was very moved one time when I connected with a woman who's now deceased, and her ancestor was a veteran of the American Revolution, but she didn't know that until some high school students did research and then did the genealogy and found her. And, you know, we talked to her through a Zoom call because this was back in the pandemic. And she said, this is the first time the Revolutionary War meant anything to me. I didn't know any of my people participated in this. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to highlight how varied the population in Connecticut was and what their experiences were. You know, and obviously it's a complicated situation because many of them were enslaved or formerly enslaved. So you get there are a lot of ways in which to deal with this.
I think, Kathy, your idea, the Speakers Bureau idea, I think has a lot of legs, because I think we could go to, I can't believe that if we find the right person, some higher up at universities or centers, that they wouldn't at least sponsor one program at their place for $250.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it would not require quote unquote heavy lifting by faculty, which would be problematic depending, I think, on who the faculty is. You know, I think that might be one that might be one endeavor that we could bite into. Bilal, do you think it would be or Sandy or anybody, how interested do you think it would, what would be the level of difficulty? We were talking about adjuncts before, of getting tenured professors to be engaged in this.
I'll let you go first, Sandy. Go ahead.
Oh, can you say a little bit more by engaged? I'm not sure what you mean.
In
by
other words, would they want to be involved? Would they want to talk about it in their classes? Would they at least be willing to recommend that students attend a speaker session? Something like that. Would they be interested in, how about this? Do you think the average tenured poli-sci or history professor, would this have interest in it?
I don't know that interest would break down via tenured or untenured, at least among the professors I know. I think it would break down around what the topic and the event actually was. And the speaker probably, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately the success of anyone coming to campus from outside of the institution depends a lot on, as Sandy has said, the topic and, you know, the interest on the individual faculty. But I think also getting interest beyond just, say, a particular department, but it's actually something at the institution itself. I mean, I think that, you know, when we invite someone who's really high profile, like, for example, Angela Davis came to our campus a couple of times, right? Which was about probably $25,000 to $30,000 speaker, right? And that was a major event for the campus. You know, Lincoln Theater, large facility, people from outside, you know, came, not only faculty and students, but others from the outside. I mean, so sometimes you get those kinds of events. I'm not sure, you know, where this falls on that pendulum for institutions to look at 250 and say, this is a really big deal and we need to do a lot behind this, as opposed to a faculty member teaching, in my case, an American National Government class, who would say, here's an opportunity to hear a speaker who talks about blah, 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 and encourage our students to go. Or something, around the reading of Phyllis Wheaton Africana Studies department, is encouraging students to go. So so a lot of it depends on, how invested is the institution overall in an event like this and how much they're going to put into it. If I invited people speaking to the school, I don't necessarily expect our Department of Communications to advertise this in the community wide. But if the institution is inviting an Angela Davis or someone else of, big name stature, then it's a different kind of investment. So I guess it depends on, what the investment is on the part of the institution for an activity like this. And I agree about whether you're tenured or not, or an adjunct, and our adjuncts often are teaching at other institutions, so they might like a day off if there's a speaker who comes in, gives them a chance to, take their students and not have to work as hard after they've driven hour or two from another institution to get there in time to teach, their class if they're an adjunct. So.
And I think for community colleges, some community colleges do have people who are experts on this era, but a lot of them will not. And so it gives a chance, to have a focused speaker that the students can engage with. And I really do think, like Sandy was talking about programming, these things are, they fit in multiple programs, the English programs, the women, gender, and sexuality studies programs, depending on the nature of the talk, right? You can get different programs to align. And you know what? If you only have an audience of 25, it's not the end of the world. That's 25 people who are getting engaged with the subject matter, who might not have had a chance before that. I mean, I guess what I worry about, we've had a lot of meetings so far, and we throw out a lot of ideas about democracy and social justice. And, I'm a historian, so of course I want to lock into the history a little bit more maybe than some others, but I think if we don't have something concrete that comes out of this, it will all have been for naught. All these meetings, because what are we doing? Just listing resources will not benefit that many people. Links on a website aren't necessarily going to do a lot. It's not very much. It's not very much to ask people to volunteer to put their names up to give a talk, or to or have some other action item, like contribute articles to Connecticut Explored, or contribute curriculum to teach it, for example. If you've got action items, then that's useful. If there are institutes like the Yukon Humanities Institute that, would organize a symposium, and then it would be open to the public, perhaps, to attend, or open to other academics to attend. That's at least an action item.
Yeah. I guess the way I've sort of seen this slightly different, which is not an objection to the speaker thing. I generally see speakers often as a one-hit item. And what I'd like to really encourage people to do is to integrate these resources, to integrate this stuff into the way they teach the class. And so if I'm doing American National Government, for example, Or if I'm doing campaigns and elections this fall, you know, and so for me, being able to dive more deeply into the struggles around Indigenous people gaining citizenship and the right to vote, and that sort of struggle around citizenship that's being integrated into a discussion I normally do on civil rights as a part of that discussion, or if I'm doing American national government, and to really sort of be able to just go a little bit more deeply into stuff around the suffragist movement and its connections to the state of Connecticut. And I'm integrating that in the classroom, and I'm engaging with students in a discussion about these things, and really, you know, if I'm talking about the Connecticut Compromise and talking about those delegates from Connecticut who were at the, you know, the Constitutional Convention. I mean, I guess that's the way I've sort of thought about it is, and maybe, I mean, and I don't think we have to choose between one or the other, but I think what we need to do is to really sort of figure out for people who want to sort of do this, and to sort of integrate it much more deeply into what they're teaching and the conversations they're engaging students in. I think that becomes a very effective sort of lasting tool. And hopefully they'll always teach these courses this way. It won't be just for 2026 that you do this, but you find a way to integrate this. Yeah.
So Blue, what is the method for getting people to do this deep dive?
I think
You said you'd like people to do it, but what's the method for getting them to do it?
I like Bilal, your mentioning of like speakers being a one-off, and that's very true. Even for the campus, they come and go. Even if it's Angela Davis, it's like your $30,000, and I think we got it for $30,000 10 years ago, 15 years ago at Connecticut College. So I don't know what our going rate is now, but you know, but there's obviously something to be really said to be in the moment and in person. So I agree, it's not necessarily an either or all the time. But I think if I was asked as a professor to be on a speakers bureau that people might book me during this entire year of 2026, I'm already exhausted. Like there's no way I would sign up for that. But if the Connecticut Humanities said, we're having a 2026 podcast that we're starting to record now, that will you do a 30-minute segment one time? You could be in conversation with others or talk about a topic yourself. I would do that. And then as professors could assign, you know, students to listen. And then maybe at some point there would also, and then there would be, you know, combined with somebody coming in person. I think the other point I'll make, and then I need to go get my dad some dinner, is I think students will definitely need to see the connection to the present. You know, so and I think nobody as inventive as them is what I mean. So I think getting in touch with student government or student affairs or student programming and giving them a challenge, like a 2026 challenge, maybe some seed, I don't know how it would work, but I can only imagine what they would come up with. I think they could do it themselves. And if it's a campus-wide challenge or something like that, I mean, there could be a 250th, I don't know, fashion show updating what people wore into today. Who knows? But I mean, they would do it because I've seen them do it every year in my classroom. Once you give them the reins, they definitely are more invested and involved. And then they always typically, not always, but I guess often come up with some things that are really inventive and wonderful. And then their peers, they're way more apt, at least on a big campus, to get people involved and invested than I think professors are for the most part.
But how does this committee connect with those centers? Are we going to write a letter? Are we going to, like, what's the
I
way
would
that you approach it?
email every SGA or USG, depending on what they call themselves, will have a president. There'll be a dean of student affairs or, you know, on every campus. I mean, that'd be a place to start. And if there's something attractive about us, I think, you know, they're always interested in a challenge, like which campus can do something, I don't know, what it could be, or the winner gets invited to dinner with a guy. I don't know. I have no idea, but I feel like that he could really do something.
In general, isn't there a communication sort of committee, Cindy and Rachel, that will really be unveiling this and reaching out to the community and making, I mean, this effort is a part of that outreach, is really the outreach to various campuses and other sort of higher ed institutions as a part of, that's why I mentioned earlier about the communication part on this. I think is just going to be critical how that is rolled out.
Yeah, there is an engagement subcommittee. I will say they have fewer connections in the university sphere. But we will get them engaged to kind of help brainstorm some of these lists. And then we can do some of this stuff internally in terms of putting together a list of student government groups and deans of students and colleges and we can start to get that together. I think what we'll want from kind of this group is shaping what that challenge could look like and what some ideas for a winner could be, what the winning place, and I don't know.
Cindy, I think that's the kind of thing that Matt Farley might be able to help us on, because I think that's sort of his world.
Yeah,
And he's got connections in all those places. He's mentioned it before. So he's got
Yeah.
connections on campuses across the state. Yeah.
Get to
Yeah.
ride float in the parade.
Mhm.
I already want to win. I don't even know what the We're gonna win. You can't. I have to go, sorry.
Thanks, Sandy. Take
No
care.
problem. Bye.
But so I'm hearing this, and I think we can kind of take this and shape what it could look like, but I like this idea of a challenge that we can then promote among college campuses. And we can figure out what this speaker idea is. I don't know if it'll be a full speakers bureau, but if we can start to gather some ideas that we can share out with folks that is within our abilities.
Well, I think the way that Kathy outlined it is, I know the issue is with CT Humanity is funding, right? As Kathy said, this would not, the universities, if they want it, they would
Right.
fund it. There wouldn't have to be any funding for CT Humanities.
Yeah.
I mean, that would leave, it's one idea. It's not, I didn't mean to suggest that this was the only thing we would do.
That's one thing.
And one component, it may be a popular component, it may not be. The challenge idea, depends what the challenge is. The kind of participation you might get. Like I'm developing an app for Connecticut Humanities on walking tours, and I'd certainly be willing to offer up a contribution to that app, like the best Revolutionary War walking tour or something, or give prizes 1, 2, and 3 to put on the app. I don't know. These are,
Yeah.
I can think of, or an essay writing contest, original research on some aspect of democracy in Connecticut, history of democracy in Connecticut. It's a history magazine, so I have to, it has to be historical in some way, but it could be the history of anything related to democracy, let's say. I think there are a number of challenges we could put out there, some of which might require Connecticut Humanities to have prize money, right? And some of which might not actually require Connecticut Humanities to spend anything. I mean, it's a little disappointing that, Idaho can have a budget of $18 million and we've got nothing. It's crazy.
We're going to have Steve lobbying this next session, so we'll be fine.
Yeah, okay.
And when you go there, every legislator says, "Oh, I loved history. It was my favorite class." right? But then how about supporting it? But
Yeah.
And I will put out there for the record, Steve will not be lobbying. Steve is a state employee. This is being recorded.
how about I'll have informal conversations with some legislators. That doesn't get us lobbying.
Only if you see him on the street.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in summarizing the conversation is, I mean, obviously we've got the idea about speakers and trying to figure out what, what that looks like and if anything is at all possible. I think, again, I feel like a major sort of task of this committee has been compiling resources. So I think those resources and compiling them and packaging them in a way that they could be useful at the higher ed. So that work is being done. And so it's just a matter. So we're actually making progress on that. We just need to, at some point, evaluate what we have and to sort of figure out if it's the right thing to sort of do. I mean, I'm intrigued by the idea. I mean, in terms of, I know nationally there's been some contests that they've sort of created for kids at the K through 12 level, and it could be interesting around tying something to an essay, something that, is connected to some sort of recognition by the Historical Society and I mean, could be an interesting sort of thing to encourage something on college campuses and just to think creatively about what some of those things, are. I'm a realist about, time commitments that people have who are doing this work. I know for me, the academic semester starts, in a couple of weeks. And so, life begins to get more complex. Some of these meetings will be right after I get out of class, for example. So, and I think just in terms of the folks who are part of this committee, how much you can get out of us to do some of that managing from the background, I think will probably be a challenge. And certainly Cindy and Rachel have taken on a great deal of this work for obvious reasons and been very good at, doing that. And so, but I mean, that strikes me as, something that's really interesting. And then I think the probably the third or the fourth piece of this is just around how we will roll this out and communicate. I think we need to do some more thinking about the outreach part of this from our committee to various institutions with, universities, colleges, and some of the other folks I hadn't even thought about that you mentioned earlier, Cindy, that makes me go, whoa, I'm getting nervous about this now, how to pull this off. So you were like,
As we said,
programs, and I was like, whoa, whoa.
they're in the back of our minds,
Okay. All right. Yeah.
but it's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they are, I feel, the least centralized of the groups we're thinking about. And
Yeah.
it might come down to, we are working on getting local committees, and it might be we create some kind of handout that we ask them to pass on to these groups in their town, because it's, there's just no central. There are, I'm sure, 200 different programs around the state.
And I guess the last thing with the speakers thing, I think also there's a possibility for that to go down outside of the institutions into the communities. I just think some of these organizations would have an interest in having expertise. And again, how that sort of shapes up and we figure out who the experts are, ultimately we've got a little time to figure that out. But I just think, I've enjoyed doing, those kind of things. I tend to be a cheap date. So the 150, 200, 250 will satisfy me. But there are a lot of academics who visited my campus would laugh at us at $200 to speak. I mean, that's part of the challenge right there, I think.
That's true. I mean, I think, I don't know, I just speak for my colleagues at what I've seen at CCSU and some of the state colleges and community colleges. I think you sort of have a public commitment, you're a state employee, you have a public commitment, and, but I understand, like, we're not getting Timothy Schneider for that, I get it.
Tried to get him once before. Yeah, he asked for a lot more money than that.
A lot of money. Yeah, Fairfield had him and it was like $40,000. or something. Yeah, but you know, I don't know that the price tag matches always the quality of the program. I mean, I'm sure he was spectacular. I heard from my friends at Fairfield, but you know, I think the students who connect, you know, and these can be, doesn't have to all be historians. It could be poets. It could be public artists, you know, who work in like Cora Marshall. Now she retired from CCSU, but she did a whole series of paintings of Connecticut runaways. She took the ads from the Connecticut Current and painted people as she imagined them from the descriptions, and they're just fabulous. They're so beautiful. You know, I don't, because she lives in Florida, she would be more expensive to bring up here. But I think if you had a centralized location for her to display some of that art, just phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. And a lot of those runaways that took place, you know, during the Revolutionary era. It's not connected to the war per se, but you know, so I think there's a lot of different kinds of speakers, not limited to history departments or political science departments.
I agree. I
And
actually like that podcast idea. I mean, I imagine WNPR might be interested in, you know,
Connecticut, again, like I don't,
you can do, yeah.
we
Yeah.
have Grating the Nutmeg. We have a podcast.
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and again, I think that should be how this is done, is to utilize those resources that are part of this group to do that. But I mean, and that could be easily posted on the website. It doesn't have to be like an hour long. It could be, you know, 15-minute clips or, you know, 20-minute clips of, you know, people who just sort of, and again, it's just a matter of, you know, who, you know, where do you sort of do that at, but I think that's a great idea. And if you look at some of the other websites from other states, I mean, they actually have people, you know, with short video clips. You can do lawmakers, you can do, you know, variety of, you know, people from historians to artists to others sort of talking about this stuff. I mean, I think that's a great idea. And that's something that's shareable, that people can listen to. It can be useful not only for college campuses, but also all the way through for all of the age groups you want to. So
Connecticut Humanities has purchased a program, Their Story, that records videos, and it's got a lot of features, like it'll give you a transcription, and you can record, you know, like you could record sort of this meeting, let's say. Now you wouldn't want to do that for Their Story, but and you can then clip out segments of it. And I think that could, you know, there are creative ways that we could use that. For example, we could invite high school students to, you know, how you guys ever watch Drunk History?
No.
I have.
No? Oh my God.
Yes.
This is so anyway, Drunk History is just fabulous. You should Google it. And we don't have to get people drunk, but basically,
Especially not high school students.
I like that disclaimer.
You could have high school or college students tell the story of somebody from their town who participated in the revolution or who was affected by the revolution. Yeah, there's some wild stories out there, like Wethersfield, for example. Did you know that there was a family annihilator in Wethersfield about whom poems are written? And the reason that he killed his entire family, at least according to the poetry and stuff that was written about him, is because he was a loyalist and he was demented and he lost everything in the American Revolution. And so then he annihilated his family. There are just a billion stories out there that are crazy, crazy. And every town has one. And, you know, that could be one of the challenges. Like you could put out a challenge, tell one of the fabulous stories from your town about somebody involved in the American Revolution or affected by the American Revolution. I don't know. I think that there are a number of creative things to do. We have various platforms, from the podcast to their story, that we can use, to Connecticut Explored, if people can send articles to us.
Yeah, I just think Rachel and Cindy would be happy if someone else owned it to make that happen. I think that's really what the key is.
And by the way, Connecticut Council for the Social Studies also does a bi-weekly podcast. Tony, Roy, and I are the hosts, and we were definitely thinking of having a series of webinars. The audience for that is classroom teachers, but we were thinking definitely of having a series of podcasts on 250 that would be aimed for the classroom teacher.
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be just one venue.
Right.
And to me, it makes sense to use existing venues rather than to try to create a podcast separate from the existing podcast platforms.
100%.
Unless Cindy can find the money.
Yeah, if we can find the money to pay somebody else to do the work to get it done.
All the podcasts.
But in the
Not one
meantime,
of your skills right now, and also to do a podcast. You don't want to do that? Okay, never mind.
no. No, I can't stand to listen to myself, and I hear that you have to do a lot of that with the podcast, so it's not happening.
Well, we've been doing them for like 2 years, and it's a lot of. You two were gonna be our first guests. You two and Bilal were gonna be our first guests.
I'm
Oh,
so
man.
excited.
You can just tell, like,
Disguising my voice.
the vibe of excitement is coming off you, Cindy.
Yeah.
I'm
Well-
with you, Cindy. I never actually listened. Like I was on the Wheelhouse last week. I also did Susan Raff's show just about the election stuff, and also did a thing for CT24. I never watched this stuff or listened to it. It happens. It's in the air, and I'm gone. And other people will say, "Oh, you did great." And I go, "Yeah, that's good to know." But I never listen to myself. I really don't. Or watch myself. I just don't. It's really yeah. So do you feel like you got enough from this
I think-
conversation?
I think this was good, and we have some work to do to kind of figure out how we could do some of these different ideas. And kind of figure out the next steps, but we'll get back to you all with some thoughts and probably try to keep that bigger group engaged. Probably send out the email to everybody who was invited to this and see if we can have a follow-up conversation at some point with more people.
I mean, it may be a way to think about it is that you've gotten some ideas from us, and then, if there are those follow-up conversations with individual people to
Yeah.
sort of say, here's what people are thinking about. Do you think this makes sense? How would this be something that would work? And, what would you tweak different? I mean, that doesn't have to be an hour and 15-minute conversation with them, but it's just a way of picking brains from people at other institutions just to sort of get a sense of what they're thinking.
Yeah. And I think that's where we do want to make sure we're getting some of those community college folks. And,
Yeah.
um,
Because otherwise, I mean, they may just not want to make the time commitment
Yeah.
to the long term, but they might be
mhm.
available to have a shorter conversation where you just sort of float some ideas.
I don't know. I gotta tell you, I don't know what the situation is like with the community colleges now. They've been put under this single umbrella. Yeah, you know about this, right? That they've all been merged.
Mhm. Yeah.
One system. So I don't know what the situation is like on the individual campuses, if it stayed pretty much the same, or if you now have to deal with the central office for anything like this. That's something you would need to find out, really, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will let everybody have 15 minutes of their day back. Always happy to give time back to folks. But thank you all for ideating, for participating, and for being game to beating up many of these thoughts.
All
Sure.
right.